Hey guys, what's going on? It's your boy Radical Rom here, and today we're going to kind of go over why there was no video last week. So, a whole lot of things went on, and I've been kind of planning this ride for a while, and my wife allowed me to do it for Christmas, or not Christmas, for my birthday. So, let's talk about what I did. About a month ago or so, I said, you know what, I want to do something crazy. Some of the boys from St. Nick's did a ride across Illinois, like east to west or west to east, whichever one. But I can't ever do anything half-ass, so I kind of wanted to do something crazy and go south north and ride from Cairo to Chicago. 450, 500 miles ish, and it meant for really long days because I was really setting up for doing it in about 4 days. So let's kind of get into the rig that I took. I was originally going to take my All City, throw some gears on it, and ride it up there. It's a steel frame 650B, who's it's and whatnots, flat bar. It's a great bike, but ultimately I decided to go with my drop bar cyclocross Raleigh RXC, and I loaded it down. Mostly one, because I didn't feel like changing the drivetrain out, and two, I wanted a few more hand positions to kind of allow me to kind of lessen the fatigue of riding each day. Alright, so Monday morning I met up with my mom and she dropped me off there at Fort Defiance State Park in Cairo. I immediately started freaking out and started loading my bags and just trying to get everything on the bike so that way it's like I can actually get there. And I kind of took this frontage road on the Ohio River all the way kind of through Cairo, but what my GPS didn't tell me, and what I learned was going to be the crux of the ride, if you will, was how rough this road was. It was rutted out, potholed out. It was essentially a service road for a foundry or factory there in Cairo, and that kind of served as kind of how the ride was going to go. I immediately hopped back on and hopped on the main road out of Cairo, kind of there by the high school, and then managed to catch a gravel road all the way up through like Mound City, and I tracked that all the way up until I hit Karnak. In Karnak, I decided to make my first stop, because it was about 2 hours in and I was going pretty slow as the gravel kind of just took it out of me. I think I was doing like 10 mile an hour on the gravel and was getting kind of discouraged as it was getting hot, and I was kind of nowhere near where I actually wanted to be come 2 hours in. I figured I'd be in Karnak in about an hour, but I decided to stop in Karnak, kind of fill up the water, fill up the Camelback, fill up my water bottles before heading out and tackling the Tunnel Hill Trail from Karnak up to Tunnel Hill. Once again, rolling was slow, and I ended up stopping in Vienna for lunch 2 hours later. Stopped there at the McDonald's before rejoining Tunnel Hill, the Tunnel Hill Trail, until we got to Tunnel Hill. I then kind of took side roads and service roads all the way up into Marion and Johnston City, which is kind of where I'm living now, so I was very familiar with the area and was able to kind of pick where I wanted to stop and refuel, which I ended up refueling in Johnston City. Once again, dead tired, 2-3 hours to get there. I was running out of water and just needed to stop. I ultimately ended up meeting up with my wife there at Wren Lake. We ended up camping at Wren Lake that night, which was nice because it was a very nice campground. Got there, set up the tent, had some pizza, most importantly, to refuel before going to bed. That was kind of the end of the first day. So I rode from essentially Cairo to Wren Lake, and that was about 179.62 kilometers, or about 110 miles. Now, at this point in time, this was the longest ride I ever done on the bike outside in the world. I woke up the next morning kind of feeling a little sore, which did not bode well for the massive day coming up. So the next day was kind of just a slight uphill all the way, but I had a nice tailwind kind of for most of the day. All the way up to Sullivan, which is just north of Shelbyville, which is about 45 minutes north of Effingham. And so I left Wren Lake nice and early, stopped and got breakfast at the McDonald's. I'm going to eat a lot of McDonald's on this trip because it's fast and I can just pop in and watch my bike and make sure nobody steals anything. So I got loaded up that morning, rode up to Mount Vernon, stopped in Mount Vernon after about an hour so that way I can refill my water bottles before moving further up north, because I knew that there was going to be long stretches on this road where water wasn't going to be available because I was going to be on back roads kind of the whole time. This day was also the day that I experienced the worst road that Google took me down, which was in Dix. Took me down a gravel road. Everything was fine. Show up, it's kind of gravelly, and then it gets a little bit more gravelly, and then it turns into like an ATV track where there's kind of like one high line, and I got a little stressed out, so I ended up walking some of that. And then it turned into like double track ATV trail where it was like, this was super nice, but I kind of wanted to get off and walk around and kind of see where I was going, and it was like really deep rutted out water. And I kind of walked up, looked, and said, that big pothole is not where you want to go. So I found an alternate route that kind of went up through the trees and around and back down, and started rolling. I stopped again somewhere near Effingham-ish, but it's all Amish country out there, so there's not really very many like grocery stores or gas stations, because the Amish don't need it. They feed their horses and off they go. And pretty much only thing to the left and right of me for most of the day, most of these days in general, was cornfields and soybean fields. So shade was at a premium. Come me being about 20 minutes south of Shelbyville, kind of coming to the end of my ride, I was probably, who knows, like 8 hours in or so. I stopped under the only shade tree I've seen for the last like 2 hours, just to kind of refuel, eat, get some water in me, and just get out of the sun for just a few minutes. Unfortunately for the people that were standing there, it was their front yard. So it was a nice lady and her grandson, and they were out playing kickball, and we had a good conversation about kind of what the area is like, where I was going, where I've been, kind of talk about this whole thing in general. And they were super awesome. They refilled my water bottle, and that was enough to get me up to Sullivan, which ended up staying at this nice hotel there, and kind of was able to get some rest, get put in the shower, do the whole 9 yards. Now, this was the longest day of the trip, and my longest day by far outside. It was 198 kilometers, or like 130-ish miles, 120-ish miles. Not a whole lot of climbing, but because of the tailwind, I was actually able to finish it faster than I was 110 the day before. And honestly, I didn't start hurting till my brain started playing games with me somewhere around like 115 miles or so, just like right towards the end, and my My brain was just telling me to shut off, stop, 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 stop. So day 3. Day 3 was 6 hours, 57 minutes, and it was 184 kilometers. Now, if you're keeping track, these are 3 of the longest days I've ever had on a bike in a row, and we are just rolling. This was a super fast day, as kind of the weather was kind of coming in and kind of going out, and I couldn't really figure out what was going on. And this was from Sullivan to Gilman. And I picked Gilman as my last stop because my wife didn't want me to stay in Kankakee. So found me a nice little hotel there in Gilman and rode on. I stopped and had breakfast before we left out of town in Sullivan. I don't remember what I had, to be completely honest with you. But got up, got moving. It was probably McDonald's. And this was a massive tailwind day, and it was super flat for the first like 120 kilometers. So I was moving, and I was kind of headed in towards the rain clouds, and there was like a group of rain clouds ahead of me and behind me, and they were kind of chasing, and it was one of those that I was for certain in my brain, I'm going to get wet. But one of the biggest challenges of this day was the fact that I was riding in day-old bib shorts that I didn't rinse out, and I started kind of getting a little bit of saddle sores. So I stopped in the first place that I was able to find a bike shop that was kind of en route, and that was in Champaign. At Champaign Cycles. Those guys were awesome. I just kind of hung out for a little bit, walked around, bought some chamois butter, put some chamois butter on, kind of just chilled, stopped and had lunch at Subway, I want to say. Oh no, I didn't stop and have lunch there because the weather was looking like it was going to get very bad very shortly, and I kind of wanted to get as far up the road before the weather set in as possible. So I ended up just riding straight through all the way up to Gilman. Stopped for refueling a few times here and there, but ended up pulling into Gilman. And then the last day was from Gilman to Chicago, and it was 7 hours 48 minutes, 174.59 kilometers, which is right there around that 106 to 110 mile mark. It's because I kind of went through Chicago, up through Chicago, and out the north side, because I was ended up staying with one of my wife's friends there. This day was rough because it was kind of headwindy all day long. So speeds were kind of down, so I just kind of rode as comfortably as I could on most of these roads. I ended up catching some really nice gravel paths, which is something I do have to compliment Illinois on a lot, is the fact that taxes are high, but they do spend a lot of money on bike infrastructure, especially in kind of the suburbs of Chicago, up near Frankfurt and that area. So I was kind of able to catch bike paths kind of all the way up into Chicago. Now, kind of once we got to the south side of Chicago, Blue Island, Oak Forest, Tinley Park, the area started getting a little bit more sketchy, a lot more condemned buildings, a lot more kind of what you expect to see in like Cairo. So my legs managed to find another gear, and I ended up pushing like all the way into Chicago and kind of didn't stop to take a break until I hit Chicago on the little bike path there on the lakefront. Lakeview Drive maybe, and then there's like a little like bike path there. Ended up riding on the wrong portion of the bike path for a minute because I didn't know what I was doing. I rode on the walking side, didn't realize there was a riding side and a walking side. Then I looked down and I'm like, oh crap, well, I messed it up. So kind of rode through Chicago, managed to wiggle my way around. I was actually going to stop by and, you know, take the ceremonial picture with the bean, but because my bike was fully loaded down and they were wanting to check bags at the front. I had nothing in my bags that was contraband or would have been considered dangerous. I had a pocket knife with me, just to cut things up if I needed to. But I figured to save time of everybody behind me and everybody in front of me and save everybody time, I wouldn't try to weasel my way in there to get a picture with the bean. It seemed like a lot of work. I wasn't in for it. I then rode the, once again, fantastic bike lanes in Chicago. Somehow, some way, they keep them up very well. Rode those up, kind of up towards Avondale area, Lincoln Square area, and stayed with one of Crystal's friends there. Got there, took a shower. They were super nice. They took me to dinner. They paid for my dinner. We had poutine and fantastic burgers. Had a peanut butter and spicy jelly burger. I felt kind of bad because one of the biggest problems with this trip was eating after riding. So I couldn't eat on the bike because it was too hot. Like, I just could not. So I was pretty much, all my calories during the day were coming from Gatorade. And every so often when I would stop, I would, like, for lunch, I would get lunch and I would probably buy some more. Like, at one point in time, I picked up a pack of like peach gummy rings, and I would eat those while I was stopped just to kind of cool off. But by the time I got to dinner time, I just had no appetite. Like, at one point in time, I ordered like a small pizza or a medium pizza and like 10 chicken wings, and they were cutting the little squares of pizzas, and I just could not eat more than like 2 of those and 1 chicken wing. So ultimately, I ended up not finishing my burger, which made me feel terrible because, well, they just paid for it and I didn't eat it all and whatever. But they let me stay there. It was fantastic. Then the last kind of that Friday, so that was Monday through Thursday, and then Friday I kind of rode back down into Chicago, and then caught the Amtrak from Chicago back to Carbondale, where my wife picked me up, and we had Don Taco that night because tacos sounded good. And it's one of the few things that's open in Chicago, or in Carbondale, that late. I kind of did this on a whim. I didn't really have a route planned. I would just go onto Google Maps in the morning and hit go, and it would just go to my headphones and off I go. What did I learn? I learned that that's not the way to go. You really kind of want to plan it out a little bit better than that. And honestly, I think that even if it would have been a little bit longer of a path, I would probably change my route into Chicago, from the south side to kind of come in more from the west side. I don't know if it's any safer there, but I was kind of ready to get out of some of those areas on the south side. The other problem with Google Maps is it took me down a lot of country roads, which is usually fantastic, and maybe this will work out for somebody else, but I just happened to catch it right as they just finished laying fresh gravel to oil over in a lot of areas, and the gravel was really rough, and it beat up my bike, and it beat me up. And maybe had I been on a different bike with bigger volume tires or some sort of suspension, maybe this wouldn't be an issue. But on the bike I rode, it definitely was not the play. I will say, if you wanted to get into bike packing, credit card camping is a great way to get started, as you can just kind of load your bags with some clothes and maybe refresher of bibs, and make sure you keep all your things charged, and there's no problem with that at all. Now, I am only allowed one of these trips a year, but I am planning a trip next year for a west-east Kentucky trip, from the lowest point in Hickman County all the way to the highest point in Black Mountain out in eastern Kentucky, which is pretty much west to as far east as you can get. Like, there's a little point up further north if you really want to do it, but it's about as far east as I'm willing to go, and it's about the same distance as this. But I do think that in that case, I might actually take an extra day to cut down the mileage per day, just to maybe alleviate some of the stress built up on the body. Go up to the top, come back down, stay in town there somewhere. But I think I want to do it on the All City next year. I kind of want to put drop bars on it just so I can have a little bit more position. I do have ideas for some different bag setups, and maybe next year my wife will be more comfortable with me camping, which would save a lot of money because I end up spending like $200 or $250 on hotels. So in that case, if she's comfortable with me camping, I might do something with maybe some racks and panniers, or do something like that to where I can carry a little bit more stuff, like a little bit, maybe bring a tent, or depending on the campsites I'm going to, maybe a hammock and hammock camp across the country, or hammock camp across the state. But either way, it was a great time, and if you want to do bike packing, just do it. This was my first trip. I had no clue what I was doing. I loaded a bike down and started pedaling. I had 4 of my biggest days ever on a bike in a row, but I had so much fun that the moment I got to Chicago, and actually, sorry, the moment I woke up in Chicago after sleeping, I was starting to plan my next trip.